Welcome to Lyme Time. I'm Allie from the Tick Chicks. We are all more than Lyme disease and chronic illness, and together we stand with you to overcome and rise. I'll bring you closer to the experts in cutting-edge treatments and even a few unexpected ways of healing. I'll ask the questions you want answers to regarding Lyme disease and successful ways of getting you closer to 100%. We are in this together and will not be defined by Lyme. My guest today is Daisy Ilchovska, and she is a nutritional therapist, researcher, and author, as well as the director of her own online clinic called Optimal Health Nutrition. Daisy specializes in working with clients with autoimmune disease, mycotoxin or mold illness, as well as Lyme disease. She overcame herself 3 autoimmune conditions: mycotoxin illness and Lyme, plus multiple co-infections, which redirected her clinical interests. In May of last year, Daisy published her book, Lyme in the Limelight, which investigates the link between Lyme disease and numerous autoimmune conditions, including brain autoimmune conditions, such as MS and Parkinson's. Daisy firmly believes that autoimmunity is one of the big missing links when it comes to Lyme disease treatment. Daisy also has contributed a chapter on Lyme disease and autoimmunity to the 3rd edition of Infection and Autoimmunity textbook, published by Elsevier, due out in August 2023. Welcome, Daisy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very pleased to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy that you're here. You're going to cover a lot of topics that I think they deserve our attention because you do so much research, and I want to know the latest and sort of what's going on out there with several interesting topics. And I'm just delighted that you're here. First of all, I want to throw it out there that you're based in the UK, mm-hmm. and but that your online clinic is open worldwide, correct?
It is, yeah. I have many international clients.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay. Well, to get things started, I wanted to discuss Lyme disease and insomnia. Now, I suffered from this. It seemed like with the onset of Lyme disease, my insomnia went through the roof. And I often talk to people who have Lyme disease, and we have something in common in that you're so critically fatigued during the day. I mean, it's like you're walking around with concrete boots and you've got that debilitating fatigue, and you finally get in bed at the end of the day only to find that you are wide awake. And I just kind of wanted to know your opinions about that and what the research is showing with insomnia.
It's a very, very common symptom. I also experienced it myself when I was dealing with Lyme disease, and some 41% of people with Lyme disease would experience insomnia. And I think in a way it's the most crippling symptom as well, because you just need to rest. You just need to detoxify your brain and sleep off some of these symptoms, but yet you can't. So there are several mechanisms linked to Lyme insomnia here. There isn't just one thing that triggers the insomnia. So one of the main mechanisms is excessive production of cytokines, or these kind of inflammatory messengers that happen with the infection. In which case, and yet not sleeping increases a particular cytokine called IL-6, which makes everything else worse. So it's kind of a vicious cycle of inflammation. So cytokine is a kind of storm is one of the main things linked to insomnia. And in this case, taking some anti-inflammatories, good anti-inflammatories like curcumin, like quercetin, can really, really help with that mechanism of how the inflammation is driving insomnia. There are other mechanisms as well. I noticed with a lot of Lyme clients, men and women, sometimes there is iron deficiency or anemia, sometimes caused by Babesia, which is a common co-infection. Babesia is a parasite that's really hard to test for, but I find that on some of the tests that have worked out are quite reliable this side of the pond. So that's one of the easiest things to actually correct. If you correct your anemia, taking something like a really good iron supplement, that can really, really help insomnia. Having a really good sleep routine and regime, staying away from blue light, which blocks melatonin, sleeping in cooler rooms, having nice and stable blood sugar levels, because again, that inflammation can drive your blood sugar levels to fluctuate. And a lot of people with Lyme sometimes can experience something called nocturnal hypoglycemia, where their blood sugar levels fall too low, and that kind of affects the liver. So that can be one of the other mechanisms via which people are struggling to sleep. Congested liver, if you wake up mostly around 2 o'clock, it could be that your liver is just overburdened, and it often is with Lyme disease, and we need to really do things to support the liver. Supplements like milk thistle, NAC, castor oil packs and things like that can really, really help. Sometimes I also see parasites driving insomnia. Parasites are very common in Lyme disease, and that's when you're getting actually the very, very early awakening at 4 and 5 a.m., especially around the full moon, and you're unable to go back to sleep. So there are several mechanisms you have to address there, but I find generally good sleep hygiene, controlling the cytokines with things like curcumin and quercetin, supporting the liver, some more specific supplements like magnesium glycinate, GABA and L-theanine as well can be really, really helpful for sleep as well. But that, I must say, most of my clients, and I've experienced it myself, I'd say insomnia is one of the most persistent symptoms. So it takes quite a lot to deal with it and identify these mechanisms. And sometimes you have to address all of them in order to be able to get some shut-eye, unfortunately.
I agree with that. It's a vicious cycle. I remember when I first went to my first doctor, who told me I actually did not have fibromyalgia, which I had been previously diagnosed with. But this was the first doctor that really went intensely into my blood work. And he said, you have to get your days and nights separated. You cannot confuse it anymore, because there are times when you're so fatigued at noon or 2 in the afternoon or 4 in the afternoon, and you can't do it anymore. You have to lie down and close your eyes. But then it just starts that cycle again. So I think it's just a vicious cycle that you have to take control of and break it. And these are all wonderful.
You have to. And unfortunately, yeah, if some people can sleep throughout the day, it's good. Excuse me, it's good to have a rest, but we all follow these circadian rhythms. Sleep is the most powerful between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And we need to just try and, rest whenever we can throughout the day, but just trying to restore that circadian rhythm and sleep at night is really, really important for recovery. Another important thing that happens during sleep and Lyme is that your lymphatic system and your brain shrinks and detoxifies. And we know that the brain is very, very affected when it comes to Lyme disease. Ultimately the bacteria aims to your brain, can cause a lot of havoc, and that's really, really important. So sleep is just one of these things you have to work on.
Sure. Your body's already fighting so hard to keep your immune system healthy, and then with insomnia, it's almost like it's just breaking it down again on a daily. You do things well during the day, and then at night it just kind of takes it back down to level 0 again. What about 5-HTP? Have you found any success with that?
Yeah, for some clients it can work. Melatonin can work for some clients. Again, it's a bit of trial and error with some of these. Melatonin can really work, usually at a bit higher doses for some people. Some people just don't feel any difference. Some people do really well with CBD oil and things like that. So in terms of some of these other supplements, it's a bit of a trial and error.
Yes, and I found that I can go through cycles of things that work and don't work, and then I can come back to something that I've taken a break from for a little while and then come back to that. Oftentimes, I want to mention people have sensitive stomachs, they can't swallow pills or whatever it is. And if you have to take yourself off a supplement or a pill, I have found that that high potency CBD cream, if I put the cream on right before I go to bed on my shoulders and my neck area, it really, really helps with my sleep. There are also some peptides out there, I think, that can help that as well. But the main thing is to just get a hold of that insomnia and sleeplessness. Maybe put your telephone in a different room to charge at night, and to really take care of yourselves, because this is one key. If you can master it, you'll be a huge step ahead in your recovery.
Yes, it can really help with recovery, and things like Epsom salt baths as well. Some types of meditation also can help you wind down if you, especially if you're feeling a bit anxious, and you've got these intrusive thoughts, which sometimes happens with Lyme and anxiety and things like that. So these are other things that can also help.
Yeah, and I love that you've mentioned everything that's pretty much over the counter and not prescription grade. Prescription grade often comes with its own side effects. And then you can confuse those side effects with your actual Lyme disease. So it gets complicated real fast. So I love your treatment options there. The second thing I'd like to talk to you about, and I know it's a big topic of your own research, are mycotoxins, and how different kinds of mycotoxins can cause different types of illness. So what are you seeing in terms of Lyme disease? Which comes first, the Lyme disease or the mycotoxins setting off the Lyme disease? Do you have any weakening the system so you're more susceptible to Lyme, or is Lyme dormant and then that triggers it? Tell us from the beginning just how it starts, and then we'll go into treatments after that.
So clinically, I believe that Lyme can be dormant for a long time, and there are other things that can awake it: trauma, stress, COVID, but mycotoxins can be a big trigger for reactivating dormant Lyme disease. And that's because they affect the part of the immune system that deals with bacterial infections. They really suppress the immune system. I mean, they are detrimental to health many levels. Most of them are carcinogenic and really bad for the kidneys and the liver, and depending on the different types, but they can have a real immune suppressive effect. So I clinically see a lot of people that have reactivation of Lyme after the exposure of mycotoxins. And in terms of my protocol when dealing with Lyme, I always test people and actually start with mycotoxin detox first. I find that, and because the symptoms of mycotoxin illness as well and Lyme disease can overlap so much, the brain fog, the fatigue, even some of the more neurological symptoms like buzzing sensations on the skin that you get with Lyme co-infections such as Bartonella. And I find that if you detox the mycotoxins, if you're in a clean environment where you're not constantly exposed, and that's a challenge, especially here in the UK where the climate is quite damp, about sometimes 30 to 50% of the symptoms can disappear just with the mycotoxin treatment. And that's kind of the relatively new thinking in terms of Lyme disease: treat the mycotoxins first. Otherwise, it's a bit like trying to drive a car with flat tires, because yes, the antimicrobials and the antibiotics might work, but you still need that function of your immune system. So mycotoxins definitely come first. That's my perspective. And I find mycotoxins in 99.9% of people with Lyme disease. And I don't know whether that's due to specific genetic variations. There is a lot of talk about specific genetic SNPs like HLA and inability to detoxify environmental toxins and things like that, which then makes you also more resistant to treatment-resistant Lyme disease. So I don't know what the exact link is, but a lot of my clients with Lyme have got mycotoxins, and they have mycotoxins at quite high levels as well.
Okay, so it's as I understand it, it's a relatively easy urine test in most cases. And can you talk us through what exactly you are searching for? What are the biggest mycotoxins?
So actually, I do a combination of two tests, and we send them from the UK over to you guys in America. There's two labs in America. I don't know whether I'm allowed to mention them that
Sure.
I use. One being the Great Plains lab, the other one being the Real Times lab. You have to do a bit of a challenge protocol before that, because some people are just really bad at detoxifying. So I get people to take glutathione and milk thistle for at least 10 days before they do the urine tests. And then we send them off for analysis, and the two labs analyze something like half a dozen types of mycotoxins. And I find some of them, one of the labs is better at picking up some particular types of mycotoxins than the other one. But we look for mycotoxins like ochratoxin A, zeroalanone. You know, some of these we know that come from water-damaged buildings. Mycotoxin like zeroalanone can come from contaminated grains as well, most often corn. And, you know, people show up with different things. I would say ochratoxin A is probably one of the most common ones that I see on tests, but I sometimes get a combination.
And those are all due to mold.
Yes, the mycotoxins are spores that appear from mold. So whether it's mold mostly in water damaged building, and it could have been past exposure, you know, it could have been exposure from 10 years ago. But if you, at that point, if you were immunosuppressed or there were really high levels of mold growing, and it could have been mold in your basement or in your loft where you don't see it, don't necessarily smell it, but it's still affecting you, you can actually get colonized by these. And even if you don't live in a water damaged building anymore, you're not exposed to these, you become the water damaged building, you become the host of these. And that's why, if some people may be thinking, oh yes, I was exposed to these mycotoxins, but it was 10 years ago now, you know, I'm well out of the place, it's still worth testing, especially if you're dealing with Lyme disease and autoimmunity.
Oh, wow. I really actually never knew that. So you could be walking around, even if you changed apartment buildings or homes, and still carrying that with you. And so if that's the case, I'd like to know what you recommend in that extreme. If you're actually the host, what treatments are available to those people?
So I must say, the treatment, as long as the first thing is minimizing exposure, so you can't get well in a sick environment, and sometimes you have to get proper mold inspectors to come and check your home that you're not currently exposed. And then you take different types of binders depending on the types of mycotoxins that you have. I generally like to use combination binders, but there's things like particular probiotics that can help, things like Saccharomyces boulardii. Eating a lot of colorful fruit and veg can also really help with the mycotoxins. These bioflavonoids that are contained in fruit and veg can really help protect you. You down the line, you know, if you have particular mycotoxin zeroalanone, that means that you're likely to have candida, which usually doesn't show on stool tests, so you have to treat the candida as well alongside mycotoxins. You have to take these nasal sprays as well, because often you'll have colonization of the sinuses and the nasal cavity as well. So it's treatment can take, I'd say average levels of a couple of types of mycotoxins can take about 6 to 8 months, as long as some people can tolerate the binders. But in some cases, high levels of mycotoxins combined with infections such as Bartonella can bring on things like mast cell activation syndrome, can bring on things like extreme histamine reactions, in which cases it's quite difficult to detox because your body is in this fight or flight state. Your immune system is overstimulated, so you tend to react even to the binders, and so you then have to add another protocol, perhaps low histamine diet, further detox protocol before you can even start on those binders. So in those cases it can be slightly more complicated, but generally if you don't have the severe histamine issues or mast cell activation syndrome, it's fairly straightforward if you're not in a moldy environment.
Interesting. And what are your favorite binders for people with mold illness?
I like combination binders, so binders that combine things like activated charcoal and zeolite, fulvic and humic acid. There is a gentle binder that I sometimes use with clients that are not able to tolerate it. It's based on carbonated bamboo. It's by a brand called Takisumi Supreme. So I sometimes use it to start with more sensitive clients. Eating plenty of fiber as well in itself can be a binder. Let's not forget that.
Sure.
So that's really important. But if you have more than one type of mycotoxin, you just have to use a combination binder, because some activated charcoal is better at binding particular types of mycotoxins, whereas zeolite is good at binding others.
That's very helpful. And in terms of, I'd like to speak a little bit also about some brain dysfunction that happens with Lyme disease. And we all joke a little bit in the Lyme community about brain fog, and it is a real thing, and it's very hard to get out of that once you're sort of being exposed to brain fog. And oftentimes we don't know what brings it on. And so can we talk a minute about brain fog, and then we'll go on to the more serious conditions of the brain? What brings on brain fog, and what are your recommendations for treatment?
So again, it could be the extreme inflammation that's causing the insomnia that's bringing the brain fog. So anti-inflammatories. But Lyme is known to kind of cross the blood-brain barrier and cause a lot of havoc. So sometimes that could be some kind of autoimmune process in the brain that has been started. Or it could be very, very simple things like electrolyte imbalance. Electrolytes can be absolutely amazing when you're having a Herx reaction or when you're having a brain fog, and they are underrated when it comes to supplements to take when it comes to Lyme disease and mycotoxin detox as well. So it could be something like electrolyte imbalance. It could be dysregulated blood sugar levels. Again, there could be several mechanisms in there that have to be addressed. That's why addressing things like diet and nutritional deficiencies alongside treatments for the eradication of the bacteria are so important. Things have to be done in conjunction. Just taking antimicrobial to deal with the Lyme is not going to get you well if you have been dealing with chronic Lyme disease. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to take heaps and heaps of supplements. I know at my worst, I was taking between 25 and 30 supplements a day.
I was too, and I just had to, at the end of the day, I had to just trust that they were working, because it's not like taking a prescription medication where you can feel it immediately happening in your body. It takes time for supplements to activate and to become, sort of the winner in your body. And, but I now I take about 6 a day now, and it's just really preventative.
Absolutely. And it's a good idea to, have these, because even if our diet is really, really good and we've we're healthy now and with minimal symptoms, there's still some supplements that are a really good idea to take. Things like glutathione, can be really good for brain fog, can be a really good supplement to continue taking. It's the master antioxidant that I find that a lot of people with Lyme disease and mycotoxins, they don't produce it. I've had myself tested and I have gene SNPs which prevent me from producing glutathione, and that's why I'm very good at accumulating environmental toxins, and that's why I was so bad at shaking off Lyme disease. So I mean, glutathione can be fantastic for things like brain fog, also coenzyme Q10, which supports your mitochondria, so it can help with energy levels, but it can help with brain health as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I always never fail to mention that a nice cool plunge, even in your bathtub, for me, it does help with the brain fog. If I just need something immediate, or if I have to go out at night and I'm just feeling terrible by the end of the day, I'll just run the cold water in my shower or fill my bathtub up with cool water, take a quick 1 to 2 minute plunge, and it really helps motivate that vagus nerve, get it relaxed, and get some sort of beautiful things running through my body. So that also helps me.
Yeah, that's a brilliant one, and it can help reset the immune system as well. It's brilliant. Some people, cold water or infrared saunas work for others, or actually alternating between the two. Really cold shower after an infrared sauna is what was really good for me.
Yeah, that's a great combination. So let's talk a little bit about when the brain gets really infected and triggers MS and Parkinson's. When you have Lyme disease and it starts going into other areas, what is your research talking about with MS and Parkinson's? Is there a link between Lyme, and also what is the latest that you're finding in terms of treatments and protocols?
So I think because obviously Parkinson's and MS are autoimmune conditions where your own immune system starts attacking parts of your body, in this case, parts of your nervous system. And I believe that that's a huge underrated element when it comes to Lyme disease. So it's not, in most cases, it's not just the infection that's causing the symptoms, it's the infection interacting with your immune system that's causing the symptoms. And sometimes clients may find that even when they've eradicated the bacterial infection, they're still having these symptoms, and that's when autoimmunity comes into play. So I urge people and always explain to my Lyme clients that when it comes to Lyme disease, you have to treat the infection, the inflammation, and the immune dysregulation or autoimmunity element. That's really, really important. With chronic Lyme, just treating the infection does not work. Okay, so in my research, I was particularly interested because of my own experience, because my Lyme got really bad really quickly. Sort of within days, I had a twitching finger and then non-epileptic seizures. I couldn't walk in a straight line or say my name, extreme brain fog, and that's what got me interested. Why did I get so bad so quickly? And it turns out because I already had 3 existing autoimmune conditions. I think my immune system was already dysregulated, and I think Lyme disease kind of that helped fast track Lyme disease, which can also lead to immune dysregulation. So that's prompted me to look at Lyme disease from this angle, and the research points out that the Lyme disease bacteria, it's very, very unusual, and it's more complex than a virus, if you like, because it has got these different lipoproteins on its surface. So if you think about the COVID spikes, we all know about COVID and the 27 spikes that cause different types of the infection. With Lyme disease, you've got these 120 lipoproteins that can switch on and off depending on what the bacteria is trying to do. And they tend to cross-react with different parts of the body and different tissues. So some of them can cross-react with tissues in your thyroid and cause things like Hashimoto, autoimmune thyroid disease. Some of them can cross-react with parts of your immune system. And that's one of the main mechanisms of how Lyme disease can trigger these multitude of autoimmune conditions. It has got the potential, I've never seen anything like it before. There is another mechanism of how Lyme disease can also trigger brain autoimmune conditions like MS and Parkinson's. And that's Lyme ultimately aims for your brain. And when it crosses that blood-brain barrier, it can cause the immune cells in your brain to get overactivated. These are called the microglial cells. And they basically start fighting the infection, and in some case, they basically become overactivated, and they can get confused and start attacking parts of your brain. So that's another mechanism that causes, more specifically, brain autoimmunity in Lyme disease. So autoimmunity, I think, is a huge underrated element. So for me and my clients, it's really important, alongside these protocols of eradication of the bacteria, to apply immune modulating protocols because of that risk of Lyme triggering multiple autoimmunity. And these autoimmune conditions, you can have the antibodies 10 years before there is damage to the tissue.
Incredible.
And that's why it's Lyme is linked to Alzheimer's, which is thought to be autoimmune, Parkinson's, ALS, or motor neuron disease, rheumatoid arthritis as well. I very often see it, Hashimoto, so many autoimmune conditions.
So many. And what is your research showing in terms of reversing? In other words, if you get the label of having one of the bigger ones like MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, if you begin treating your Lyme symptoms in ways that we've just discussed, is there a possibility that you can reverse any of those?
The research, unfortunately, is lacking in this area because it's really hard to do research on Lyme because of the unreliable testing and factors. But clinically, I see a lot of these symptoms and labels given to people. I mean, I've had clients that have been told they've got 2 years to live and they've got ALS, and they're still alive and doing well, when you actually apply the Lyme disease protocols alongside protocols for managing that autoimmune element. So there is hope. I'm not saying that Lyme disease is the only trigger of these autoimmune conditions, but I'm saying that it's a big underestimated factor. There's other toxins, mycotoxins trigger multiple autoimmune conditions too. And when there's the combination of two, you're even more likely to, there's heavy metals as well. They've got the potential, and, other things, but Lyme is a big underestimated factor.
It certainly is. And with our children being the number one group being affected by Lyme disease, it is just so troubling to think of the future, because they'll almost immediately or soon thereafter, after getting it, their immune system is still strong enough to then have it go dormant after a while if it's treated properly and with proper care and all of that. But then there's still that first break in the immune system, right? And so it just seems like as they go on with their lives, there are more and more things that they might be susceptible to.
Absolutely. And autoimmune conditions have grown exponentially over the years. And I think that's what some of these infections are, an underappreciated factor there.
I agree. And with Lyme disease cases on the rise, so you've got autoimmune disorders on the rise, ADD on the rise, autism on the rise, and Lyme disease cases. It's sort of makes you wonder.
Yeah, it's too much of a coincidence. Unfortunately, Lyme disease is not very well recognized infection here in the UK, which makes my job very difficult, and testing is very unreliable. But I came across research that pointed that there could be still, even in the UK, there could be about 120,000 new infections a year. In some countries in Central Europe, that figure is about 500,000 new infections a year. And with climate change as well, migration of birds and other animals that carry ticks, I think you're now getting Lyme disease in much cooler climates as well.
Oh, yes. And even more aggressive even than Lyme disease. We now have this alpha gal, which is spreading. It's still a little bit rarefied, but in the Midwest, I know that there are many schools that are now being alerted to alpha gal. It's sort of like having a peanut allergy, except they are now allergic to meat and meat byproduct. So there's a severe issue with what they can even eat. So anyway, the schools are being alerted if your child has something like that along those lines, which we didn't see 10 years ago, I don't think. Not in these numbers. So, and then, we can go down the road of, is it passed on through blood transfusions? Could it be possibly spread that way?
Well, nobody's testing blood transfusions for Lyme disease. The suggestions that can also be passed from a mother to a child if untreated, that it can be sexually transmitted as well. That's another thing. The two need more research, but as I said, research in Lyme disease is very, very sparse at the moment. Very, very sparse. It's just, although it's the quickest growing vector-borne disease around the world, that health officials here don't seem to be very concerned.
Yeah, I think in the United States, we're catching on a little bit more now, possibly, especially post-COVID, because there's long-term COVID, which basically feels like, long haul Lyme disease. And so they're so similar in so many ways, though they're different. But I think it's bringing a lot of these things to the surface for sure. And test reliability, I know that you touched on this before, but are we making any progress at all with Lyme disease testing?
First of all, people that may suspect they have Lyme disease need to know that no test is perfect. I find that tests that rely on your immune system's response in creating antibodies are not very reliable because of that effect of Lyme disease on your immune system. So the test I find most reliable is microscopy-based testing. I personally, from the UK, we use a lab in Hungary that we send off testing to. And they've developed an AI that looks for the typical spirochete of the Lyme disease bacteria, and it's a very, very typical shape of the bacteria, only shared by one other bacteria, which is the syphilis bacteria, and there isn't much syphilis these days. So and I find that test the most reliable one, because a lot of my clients have got this autoimmune element that's there, and you can get a lot of false negative tests. I've had it myself. I had about 3 or 4 false negative tests, and it was full of Lyme disease. And that's where you get the doctors telling you it's not Lyme disease, we don't know what it is, maybe it's in your head, and that's where you get a lot of difficulty even getting diagnosis. And sometimes it can take 10 years and 10 tests, and you're still not sure that you've got Lyme disease. But for me, in my day-to-day practice, I find microscopy-based dark blood analysis testing to be the most reliable. And they are also reliable at picking up these more difficult to pick up co-infections like Bartonella and Babesia. Babesia is very hard to pick up because it's all the parasites all within your red blood cells as well. So that's the main test I actually use in my clinic, and alongside clinical questionnaires, because sometimes Lyme disease have to be a clinical diagnosis. With chronic Lyme disease, you can have over 40 symptoms, and when clients come to you and they tick a lot of these boxes or have been given previous diagnoses like chronic fatigue syndrome, like fibromyalgia, like rheumatoid arthritis that's rheumatoid factor negative, like MS, because you can have the same lesions that you have with MS, with Lyme disease on your brain on MRI scans as well. So you have to have that clinical knowledge as well as, trying to find the best tests that you can.
Well, thank you so much, Daisy, for your time. I've just loved our time together. I hope that we can do it again soon. Your book, Lyme in the Limelight, is now available at thetickchicks.com. But will you also let everyone know where they can reach you and how to contact you in case they want to go further with you?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, Ali, I really enjoyed our time together too. And hopefully, some of these things that we discussed are helpful to your listeners. So they can find out more about me at optimalhealthnutrition.co.uk. I have social media accounts at the Lyme Nutritionist and at Optimal Health Nutrition. My book, Lyme in the Limelight, is also available on Amazon as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Are there any parting words that you would like to share with our warriors out there who may be in really bad shape right now?
It's just focusing on these three main things when you're doing your Lyme disease treatment: the infection, inflammation, and immune dysregulation. If you see these as the main foundational things to focus on, and clear up, test yourself reliably for mycotoxins and start with those. Maybe, if sometimes with Lyme disease you get stuck and you're on treatment number 142, for example, and you don't know where to start, focus on infection, inflammation, immune dysregulation, and mycotoxins.
Thank
and
you.
You can do it.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and good luck with everything. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you again for being our guest.
Thank you so much for having me.